Hi guys, this is Raya. This is part 2 of functions. In this session, we're going to find inverse of functions, and the session is suitable for GCSE, IGCSE, Form 4 students and similar curriculums. So it is a long session because I'm going to cover all sorts of examples, and we'll start with some easy questions and getting into grade 8 to 9 questions towards the end. So feel free to take a break and then come back, carry on, or just feel free to pause the video, try the questions, come back and check your answers. So before we start, just a polite reminder, if you enjoy my videos, please remember to press like and also subscribe to my channel. Thank you very much, and let's start the session. What is an inverse of a function then? Well, the best way to understand this is to try and define function of x first. So let's say function of x is equal to 3x. What does that mean? Well, we had unknown x and then something happened to it. So it was multiplied by 3 and then we got 3x. So let's say we only knew the final outcome 3x. How do we go back to the original process? So what do we do here? Well, we have 3x. We need to go backwards. What do we need to do? We need to divide by 3 in order to get the original value. So this is how you understand the inverse of a function, the opposite process of getting the original amount or variable. So the way we write the inverse of a function is this way. So if we have function of x defined something like this, the inverse of a function is written as f minus 1 x. So this is the inverse of a function, and functions can be written as f of x. It could also be g inverse of x, h inverse of x. So it depends how you define your original function. So you could say h of x, g of x, then their inverse functions will be written like this. Let's do some examples and I'll show you step by step on what you need to do in order to find the inverse of a function. First of all, what we need to do is replace function of x and write this as y. And this is just literally for convenience because we can't start manipulating functions or equations having the function of x. So it's easy just to write y is equal to x plus 5. So the first step is to use the y. The next step you want to do is make x the subject, because that is where we want to find what was the original function. So we want to make x as the subject. So number 2, we're going to make x as a subject. In this case, what do we have? X equals to y negative 5. And the third step you want to do is now swap the y's and x. So we're going to swap the variables. We're now going to write this as y equals to x negative 5. And the final step is to write this as the inverse notation. So this now is the inverse of the function of x. And how do we write that? F negative 1x equals to x negative 5. And this is our inverse of this function here. And you can see we had an x, a 5 was added to it. So to go back, we need to do x negative 5. Let's do example 2. Well, first step, what do we need to do? So I'm just going to mark it this time. We're going to replace f of x with y. So y is equal to 3x negative 1. Step 2, what do we need to do is make x as a subject of the formula. So we're going to make 3x equals to y add 1. Now, if you don't know how to rearrange formula or equations, you need to watch one of my videos or somewhere, but this is not the session to learn how to make something subject of a formula. However, I will do my best to go through that. So now we've got 3x equals y add 1. To get x, you need to divide by 3 both sides. So we're going to divide by 3 throughout, and then we have x equals to y plus 1 over 3. So now we have done 2 steps. What's the third step? We need to swap the y's and x. So now we're going to write this as y is equal to x plus 1 over 3. And the final step then is to write the inverse notation. So now this becomes f inverse of x equals to x plus 1 over 3. And now for question 3, feel free to pause the video, come back and check your answer. So the first step then, so we're going to replace the f of x and write this as y for convenience. So we're going to have y equals to 3x minus 1 squared. Try to avoid expanding these double brackets because you'll end up with two terms with x, and that is going to complicate your situations because you want to make x the subject. So what we're going to do is square root this in order to release the x. We're going to square root both sides then. So this is going to be square root of y is equal to 3x minus 1. Remember, if you square root a square, you will get what is left. So now we want to make x the subject. What do we need to do? Well, we have a square root of y add 1 equals to 3x, and therefore x is equal to square root of y plus 1 over 3. So now we've got x as the subject, we need to swap this and write this as y. So that is our third step then. So now we can write y is equal to square root. We're going to swap the y and x. So now I'm going to write x in here plus 1 over 3. And for the final step then, we're going to use the inverse notation. So now we're going to write f minus 1x equals to square root of x plus 1 over 3, and this is the inverse of this function here. And now for question 4, so step 1, we're going to replace the f of x and write this as y is equal to 1 over x, and then we're going to make x a subject. So if we want to get rid of this x here, we need to multiply by x here, multiply by x here, and then these two will cancel. Then I will have xy equals to 1, which means x is going to be equals to 1 over y. Now we've got x as a subject. What are we going to do? Well, we are going to swap the y's and x. So I've got y equals to 1 over x. And the last step then is to use the inverse notation. So f negative 1x is going to be equal to 1 over x. Now you can see our original function is the same as our inverse function. This is called the self-inverse. The two functions are the same. Now moving on to slightly harder question. First step then is to remove the f of x. We're now going to write this as y equals to x minus 6 over 4. We want to make x the subject. That's the next step. So what do we need to do is multiply here by 4 and 4 here. So we have 4y is equal to x minus 6, because this and this will cancel. We want to make x a subject, so x is going to be equal to 4y plus 6. Right, what do we need to do next is swap the y's and x. So now we have y equals to 4x plus 6, and the final step is to write the inverse notation. So this is going to be f negative 1x then equals to 4x plus 6, and this is your final answer. Right, moving on to question 6 is slightly different and slightly harder because we have x here and x here. But if you know how to rearrange, it shouldn't give you any problem, but I would go through that with you. So first thing is to replace the g of x with y. So y is going to be equal to 2 plus 3x over x minus 2. Now what I like to do with my student is just write this as y over 1 and then just cross multiply here and there, and that will give you the whole of this, which is going to be 1 times all this and then y times all this. These two are going to be equal. So what do I have? I can do 1 times all this, so that's going to give me 2 plus 3x, and that's going to be equal to y multiply with this denominator here. So y times x is xy, y times negative 2 is negative 2y. Now you can see I have an x on both sides. So the way to do this is to make sure everything that has x is on one side and everything else is on the other side. So I'm just going to remove this and write as 3x. I'm going to bring this to the other side, so minus xy. That's going to be equal to minus 2 minus 2y. So we can factorize now and have the x outside. So we have x and then 3x minus y equals to minus 2 minus 2y. Moving on then, we can make x the subject now. So we got x equals to, we need to divide both sides with 3, take away y. So this is going to be minus 2 minus 2y over 3 minus y. Now you can write this neatly by multiplying here with negative 1, and you have to balance it and write times negative 1, and then you'll end up with x equals to 2 plus 2y over, this would now become positive, so I'm going to write it here, and this is positive times negative 1, that will be negative 3. That looks much neater now. And now we can swap the y's and x, so we can write y equals to 2 plus 2x over x minus 3. And the final step then is to write with inverse notation. So f inverse of x is going to be equal to 2 plus 2x over x, take away 3. This is now your final answer. Right, this is the last question now, so feel free to pause the video, come back and check your answers. What do we need to do is remove f of x for convenience and write this as y. So we're going to write y equals 1 minus x over 3x plus 1. What is the next thing we want to do is rearrange and have x the subject of the formula or this equation. So we're going to write it as y over 1 cross multiply. So we're going to multiply this with that. It doesn't matter if you do this times that or this times this. So we're going to multiply y times 3x, that will give us 3xy, and then y times positive 1, this will give us plus y, and that's going to be equal 1 times all this, which will give us 1, take away x. Right, so you can see we've got x here and x here. Now I'm going to rearrange these and make sure I have anything with x on the same side and everything else on the other side. So I'm going to do 3xy and then it's minus x here, so I'm going to have plus x here equals to 1. So I'm getting rid of this positive y. On this side, it will be 1 take away y. Next step then is to factorize to have this x freed up. So now I've got x in the bracket 3y plus 1 equals to 1 minus y. Now to have x a subject, then x is equal to 1 minus y over 3y plus 1. So this is now the third step. We need to swap the y's and x. So this is going to be y equals to 1 minus x over 3x plus 1. So the last step is to use the inverse notation. So f negative 1x is going to be equal to 1 minus x over 3x plus 1. And this is your final answer. So thank you for hanging on to the end. I hope you liked the video. Please remember to like and subscribe, and bye for now.